Alright, dude, get this. I just was going on a tear. I was reading what we're about to listen to, SNES, Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Dude, I was recording for 7 minutes, and I didn't have the mic turned on, because I'm that guy. So, and now my stomach is making noises. Awesome, this is going to be a good read. You know what, it is going to be a good read. I don't care. Nothing's going to ruin this for me. I had this growing up. Best system ever. Fight me over it. 4 buttons. First time we saw 4 buttons, right? Oh, your trivia question. What game am I playing if that damn dog is laughing after I miss my shot? What game is that? Dog is laughing at me after I miss my shot. Put it in the comments. I will pin you to the top if you answer correctly first. Okay, here we go. Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System, commonly shortened to Super NES or Super Nintendo, is a 16-bit home video game console developed by Nintendo that was released in 1990 in Japan and South Korea, 91 in North America, 92 in Europe and Oceania, and 93 in South America. In Japan, it is called the Super Famicom. In South Korea, it's called the Super Comboy, and it was distributed by Hyundai Electronics. The system was released in Brazil on August 30th, 93 by Playtronic. Although each version is essentially the same, several forms of regional lockout prevent cartridges for one version from being used in other versions. The SNES is Nintendo's second programmable home console following the NES, Nintendo Entertainment System. The console introduced advanced graphics and sound capabilities compared with other systems at the time. It was designed to accommodate the ongoing development of a variety of enhancement chips integrated into game cartridges to be competitive into the next generation. The SNES received largely positive reviews and was a global success, becoming the best-selling console of the 16-bit era. After launching relatively late and facing intense competition from Sega's Genesis console in North America and Europe, overlapping the NES's 61.9 million unit sales, the SNES remained popular well into the 32-bit era, with 49.1 million units sold worldwide by the time it was discontinued in '03. It continues to be popular among collectors and retro gamers, with new homebrew games and Nintendo's emulated re-releases, such as on the Virtual Console, the Super NES Classic Edition, and Nintendo Switch Online. Let's talk about its history. To compete with the popular family computer in Japan, NEC Home Electronics launched the PC Engine in 1987, and Sega followed suit with the Mega Drive in 1988. The two platforms were later launched in North America in '89 as the TurboGrafx 16 and the Sega Genesis, respectively. Both systems were built on 16-bit architectures and offered improved graphics and sound over the 8-bit NES. However, it took several years for Sega's system to become successful. Nintendo executives were in no rush to design a new system, but they reconsidered when they began to see their dominance in the market slipping. On September 9th, 1987, then Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi revealed the development of the Super Famicom in the newspaper Kyoto Shimbun. On August 30th, 1988, in an interview with Touch magazine, he announced the development of Super Mario Bros. 4, Dragon Quest V, 3 original games, and he projected sales of 3 million units of the upcoming console. Famicom Hisubun magazine speculated that Nintendo's early announcement was probably made to forestall Christmas shopping for the PC Engine, and relayed Enix's clarification that it was waiting on sales figures to select either PC Engine or Super Famicom for its next Dragon Quest game. The magazine and Enix both expressed a strong interest in networking as a standard platform feature. The console was demonstrated to the Japanese press on November 21st, 1988, and again on July 28th, 1989. The launch. designer of the original Famicom. The Super Famicom was released in Japan on Wednesday, November 21st, 1990 for 25,000 yen, equivalent to 27,804 yen in 2019. It was an instant success. Nintendo's initial shipment of 300,000 units sold out within hours, and the resulting social disturbance led the Japanese government to ask video game manufacturers to schedule future console releases on weekends. The system's release also gained the attention of the Yakuza, leading to a decision to ship the device at night to avoid robbery. With the Super Famicom quickly outselling its rivals, Nintendo reasserted itself as the leader of the Japanese console market. Nintendo's success was partially due to the retention of most of its key third-party developers, including Capcom, Konami, Tecmo, Square, Koei, and Enix. Nintendo released the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, a redesign version of the Super Famicom in North America for $199, equivalent to $378.11 in 2020. It began shipping in limited quantities on August 23, 1991, with an official nationwide release date of September 9, 1991. The SNES was released in the United Kingdom and Ireland in April 1992 for £150, equivalent to £317.35 in 2020. Most of the PAL region versions of the console use the Japanese Super Famicom design, except for the labeling and the length of the joypad leads. The Playtronic SNES in Brazil, although PAL-M uses the North American design. Both NES and SNES were released in Brazil in '93 by Playtronic, a joint venture between the toy company Estrela and consumer electronics company Gradiente. The SNES and Super Famicom launched with few games, but these games were well received in the marketplace. In Japan, only 2 games were initially available: Super Mario World and F-Zero. A third game, Bombuzal, was released during the launch week. In North America, Super Mario World launched as a bundle with the console. Other launch games include F-Zero, Pilot Wings, both of which demonstrate the console's Mode 7 pseudo 3D rendering capability, SimCity, and Gradius 3. Let's talk about the console wars. The rivalry between Nintendo and Sega resulted in what has been described as one of the most notable console wars in video game history, in which Sega positioned the Genesis as the cool console with the games aimed at older audiences and aggressive advertisements that occasionally attacked the competition. Nintendo, however, scored an early public relations advantage by securing the first console conversion of Capcom's arcade hit Street Fighter II for SNES, which took more than a year to make the transition to the Genesis. Though the Genesis had a 2-year lead to launch time, a much larger library of games, and a lower price point, it only represented an estimated 60% of the American 16-bit console market in June 1992, and neither console could maintain a definitive lead for several years. Donkey Kong Country is said to have helped establish the SNES's market prominence in the latter years of the 16-bit generation, and for a time maintained against the PlayStation and Saturn. According to Nintendo, the company had sold more than 20 million SNES units in the US, according to a 2014 Wedbush Securities report based on NPD sales data. The SNES outsold the Genesis in the US market by 1.5 million units. Let's talk changes in policy. During the NES era, Nintendo maintained exclusive control over games released for the system. The company had to approve every game. Each third-party developer could only release up to 5 games per year, but some third parties got around this by using different names, such as Konami's Ultra Games brand. Those games could not be released on another console within 2 years, and Nintendo was the exclusive manufacturer and supplier of NES cartridges. However, competition competition from Sega's console brought an end to this practice. In '91, Acclaim Entertainment began releasing games for both platforms, with most of Nintendo's other licensees following suit over the next several years. Capcom, which licensed some games to Sega instead of producing them directly, and Square were the most notable holdouts. Buckle up, there's a little bit of wind outside, I apologize. Nintendo continued to carefully review submitted games, scoring them on a 40-point scale and allocating marketing resources accordingly. Each region performed separate evaluations. Nintendo of America also maintained a policy that, among other things, limited the amount of violence in the games on its systems. The surprise arcade hit Mortal Kombat, a gory fighting game with huge splashes of blood and graphically violent fatality moves, was heavily censored by Nintendo. Because the Genesis version allowed for an uncensored version via cheat code, it outsold the censored SNES version by a ratio of nearly 3-1. U.S. Senators Herb Kohl and Joe Lieberman convened a congressional hearing on December 9, 1993, to investigate the marketing of violent video games to children. Though Nintendo took the high ground with moderate success, the hearings led to the creation of the Interactive Digital Software Association and the Entertainment Software Rating Board, and the inclusion of ratings on all video games. With these ratings in place, Nintendo decided its censorship policies were no longer needed. Let's talk about the 32-bit era and beyond. While other companies were moving on to 32-bit systems, Rare and Nintendo proved that the SNES was still a strong contender in the market. In November '94, Rare released Donkey Kong Country, a platform game featuring 3D models and textures pre-rendered on Silicon Graphics workstations. With its detailed graphics, fluid animation, and high-quality music, Donkey Kong Country rivals the aesthetic quality of games that were being released on newer 32-bit CD-based consoles. In the last 45 days of '94, 6.1 million copies were sold, making it the fastest-selling video game in history to that date. This game sent a message that early 32-bit systems had little to offer over the SNES, and proved the market for the more advanced consoles of the near future. According to TRSTS reports, 2 of the top 5 best-selling games in the US for December '96 are SNES games. In October 1997, Nintendo released a redesigned model of the SNES, the SNES 101 model, referred to as New Styled Super NES, in North America for $100, with some units including the pack-in game Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. Like the earlier redesign of the NES model NES 101, the new model is slimmer and lighter than its predecessor, but it lacks S-video and RGB output, and it is among the last major SNES-related releases in the region. A similarly redesigned Super Famicom Jr. was released in Japan at around the same time. However, the redesign did not make it to Europe. Nintendo ceased the production of the SNES in North America in 1999, about 2 years after releasing Kirby's Dream Land 3, its final first-party game in the US, on November 27, 1997, and a year after releasing Frogger, its final third-party game in the US. In Japan, Nintendo continued to produce both of the Family Computer and the Super Famicom until September 25, 2003, and new games were produced until the year 2000, ending with the release of Metal Slater Glory Director's Cut on November 29, 2000. Many popular SNES games were ported to the Game Boy Advance, which has similar video capabilities. In 2005, Nintendo announced that SNES games would be made available for download via the Wii's Virtual Console service. On October 31st, 2007, Nintendo Co. Limited announced that it would no longer repair Family Computer or Super Famicom systems due to an increasing shortage of the necessary parts. On March 3rd, 2016, Nintendo Co. Limited announced that it would bring SNES games to the new Nintendo 3DS and new Nintendo 3DS XL, and later to the new Nintendo 2DS XL via its eShop download service. At the Nintendo Direct event on September 4th, 2019, Nintendo announced that it would be bringing select SNES games to the Nintendo Switch Online platform. Hardware. Technical specifications to kick it off. The 16-bit design of the SNES incorporates graphics and sound coprocessors that perform tiling and simulated 3D effects, a palette of 32,768 colors, and 8-channel ADPCM audio. These base platform features, plus the ability to dramatically extend them all through substantial chip upgrades inside of each cartridge, represent a leap over the 8-bit NES generation and some significant advantages over 16-bit competitors such as the Genesis. On the CPU and RAM, the CPU is a Ricoh 5A22, which is a derivative of the 16-bit WDC65C816 microprocessor. In NTSC regions, its nominal clock speed is 3.58 MHz, but the CPU will slow down to either 2.68 or 1.79 when accessing some slower peripherals. This CPU has an 8-bit data bus and 2 address buses. The 24-bit bus A is designated for general access, and the 8-bit bus B can access support chip registers such as the video and audio coprocessors. The WDC65C816 also supports an 8-channel DMA unit, an 8-bit parallel I/O port, and controller port interface circuits allowing serial and parallel access to controller data, a 16-bit multiplication and division unit, and circuitry for generating non-maskable interrupts on VBlank and IRQ interrupts on calculated screen positions. Early revisions of the 5A22 used in SHVC boards are prone to spontaneous failure. This can produce a variety of symptoms, including graphics glitches during Mode 7 operation, a black screen on power on, or inability to read the controllers properly. The first revision 5A22 also had a fatal bug in the DMA controller that could cause games to crash when running. This was corrected in subsequent revisions. The console contains 128 kilobytes of general purpose RAM, which is separate from the 64 kilobytes VRAM dedicated to the video and audio subsystems. On the video, the Picture Processing Unit, or PPU, consists of 2 separate but closely tied IC packages. It contains 64 kilobytes of SRAM for storing video data, 544 bytes of Object Attribute Memory, or OAM, for storing sprite data, and 256 by 15 bits of Color Generator RAM, CG RAM, for storing palette data. This CG RAM allows the console to display up to 256 colors chosen from the 15-bit RGB color space for a total of 32,768 possible colors. The PPU is clocked by the same signal as the CPU and generates a pixel every 2 or 4 cycles. 8 video modes are available to the programmer. Mode 0, 4 layers, all using 4 color palettes. Each PG uses its section of the SNES palette. Up to 96 colors can be displayed on the backgrounds, 24 colors per layer. Mode 1, 3 layers, 2 using 16 color palettes and 1 using 4 color palettes. Up to 120 colors can be displayed by the first 2 layers and 24 colors by the 3rd layer. Mode 2, 2 layers, both using 16 color palettes. Each tile can be individually scrolled. Up to 120 colors can be displayed on the screen. Mode 3, 2 layers, 1 using the full 256 color palette and 1 using 16 color palettes. The 256 color layer can also directly specify colors from an 11-bit RGB 443 color space. Up to 256 colors are displayed by the first layer and 120 colors by the second layer. Mode 4, 2 layers, 1 using the full 256 256 color palette and one using 4 color palettes. The 256 color layer can directly specify colors, and each tile can be individually scrolled. Up to 256 colors are displayed by the first layer and 24 colors by the second layer. Mode 5, 2 layers, one using 16 color palettes and one using 4 color palettes. The tile decoding is altered to facilitate the use of the 512 width and interlaced resolutions. Up to 120 colors are displayed by the first layer and 24 colors by the second layer. Mode 6, 1 layer using 16 color palettes. Tile decoding is as in Mode 5, and each tile can be individually scrolled. Up to 120 colors can be displayed on screen. Mode 7, 1 layer of 128 by 128 tiles of size 8 by 8 from a set of 256, which may be interpreted as a 256 color 1 plane layer or a 128 color 2 plane layer. The layer may be rotated and scaled using matrix transformations. A programming technique called HDMA can be used to change the matrix parameters for each scan line to generate perspective effects. On the audio, are you asleep yet? Did that put you to sleep? The audio subsystem is called the SSMP, which is a dedicated single chip consisting of an 8-bit CPU, a 16-bit DSP, and 64 kilobytes of SRAM. It is designed and produced by Sony and is completely independent from the rest of the system. It is clocked at a nominal 24.576 MHz in both NTSC and PAL systems. It is capable of producing stereo sound composed from 8 voices generated using 8-bit audio samples and various effects such as echo. Regional lockout. Nintendo employed several types of regional lockout, including both physical and hardware incompatibilities. Physically, the cartridges are shaped differently for different regions. North American cartridges have a rectangular bottom with inset grooves matching protruding tabs in the console, and other regions' cartridges are narrower with smooth curve on the front and no grooves. The physical incompatibility can be overcome with use of various adapters or through modification of the console. Internally, a regional lockout chip, a CIC, within the console and in each cartridge prevents the PAL region games from being played on Japanese or North America consoles and vice versa. The Japanese and North American machines have the same region chip. This can be overcome through the use of adapters, typically by inserting the imported cartridge in one slot and a cartridge with the correct region chip in a second slot. Alternatively, disconnecting one pin of the console's lockout chip will prevent it from locking the console. Hardware in later games can detect this situation, so it later became common to install a switch to reconnect the lockout chip as needed. PAL consoles face another incompatibility when playing out of the region cartridges. The NTSC video standard specifies video at 60 Hz, but PAL operates at 50 Hz, resulting in an approximately 16.7% slower frame rate. Additionally, PAL's higher resolution results in letterboxing of the output image. Some commercial PAL region releases exhibit this same problem and therefore can be played in NTSC systems without issue, but other games will face a 20% speed up if played in an NTSC console. To mostly correct this issue, a switch can be added to place the SNES PPU into a 60 Hz mode supported by most newer PAL televisions. Later games will detect this setting and refuse to run, requiring the switch to be thrown only after the check completes. As far as casing, we have some pictures of casing. I'll get out of the way here. It's a Japanese SHVC001 model showcased a North American SNES. Pretty fascinating, actually, if you're looking at it and you had any of these consoles and didn't know the other counterpart existed. The PAL region SNSP, a newer style. The Japanese, the South Korean, very cool. All versions of the SNES are predominantly gray of slightly different shades. The original North American version, designed by Nintendo of America industrial designer Lance Barr, who previously redesigned the Famicom to become the NES, has a boxy design with purple sliding switches and a dark gray eject lever. The loading bay surface is curved both to invite interaction and to prevent food or drinks from being placed on the console and spilling, as had happened with the flat-surfaced NES. The Japanese and European versions are more rounded, with darker gray accents and buttons. The North American New Style Super NES model SNES 101 and the Japanese Super Famicom Junior model SHVC 101, all designed by Barr, are both smaller with a rounded contour. However, the SNES 101 buttons are purple, where the Super Famicom Junior buttons are gray. The European and American versions of the SNES controllers have much longer cables compared to the Japanese Super Famicom controllers. All versions incorporate a top-loading slot for game cartridges, although the shape of the slot differs between regions to match the different shapes of the cartridges. The multi-out connector, later used on the N64 and GameCube, can output composite video, S-video, and RGB signals, as well as RF with an external RF modulator. Original versions additionally include a 28-pin expansion port under a small cover on the bottom of the unit and a standard RF output with channel selection switch on the back. The redesigned models output composite video only, requiring an external modulator for RF. The ABS plastic used in the casing of some older SNES and Super Famicom consoles is particularly susceptible to oxidation with exposure to air, likely due to an incorrect mixture of the stabilizing or flame retarding additives. This, along with the particularly light color of the original plastic, causes affected consoles to quickly become yellow. If the sections of the casing came from different batches of plastic, a two-tone effect results. This issue may be reversed with a method called retrobrighting, where a mixture of chemicals is applied to the case and exposed to UV light. The Nintendo Super System is an arcade system for retail preview of 11 particular SNES games in the United States, similar to the PlayChoice 10 for NES games. It consists of slightly modified SNES hardware with a menu interface and 25-inch monitor that allows gameplay for a certain amount of time depending on game credits. Manufacturing of this model was discontinued in 1992. The Game Cartridge. SNES games are distributed on ROM cartridges, officially referred to as Game Pack in most Western regions and as cassette in Japan and parts of Latin America. Though the SNES can address 128 megabit, only 117.75 megabit are actually available for cartridge use. A fairly normal mapping could easily address up to 95 megabit of ROM data, 48 megabit at fast ROM speed, with 8 megabit of battery-backed RAM. However, most available memory access controllers only support mappings of up to 32 megabit. The largest games released, Tales of Fantasia and Star Ocean, contain 48 megabit of ROM data, and the smallest games contain only 2 megabit. Cartridges may also contain battery-backed SRAM to save the game state, extra working RAM, custom coprocessors, or any other hardware that will not exceed the maximum current rating of the console. Games. Alright, maybe I'll be interested in this. Games. 1,757 games were officially released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, 717 in North America, plus 4 championship cartridges, 521 in Europe, 1,448 in Japan, 231 on Satellaview, and 13 on Sufami Turbo. Many SNES games such as Super Mario World, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Donkey Kong Country, Earthbound, Super Metroid, Yoshi's Island, and others are often cited to be some of the greatest video games of all time. Numerous SNES games have been re-released several times, including on the Virtual Console. Super NES Classic Edition, and the Classic Game Service on Nintendo Switch Online. It is possible to play all original Game Boy games on the SNES with the Super Game Boy add-on. In the intervening years, many emulators for SNES software have been produced. Some SNES games support Mode 7, a graphics mode that transforms the background layer into a two-dimensional horizontal texture-mapped plane that trades height for depth. On peripherals, the standard SNES controller adds X and Y face buttons on the design of the NES iteration, arranging the four in a diamond shape, and adds two shoulder buttons. It features an ergonomic design by Lance Barr, later used in the 93 for the NES 039 Dogbone controllers, also designed by Barr. The Japanese and PAL region versions incorporate the colors of the four action buttons into the system's logo. The North American version's buttons are colored to match the redesigned console. The X and Y buttons are lavender with concave faces, and the A and B buttons are purple with convex faces. Several later consoles derive elements of their controller design from the SNES, including the PlayStation, Dreamcast, Xbox, and Wii Classic controller. This same face button layout, including its exact letter designations, would also be used in future Nintendo systems, starting with the Nintendo DS. Throughout the course of its life, a number of peripherals were released which added to the functionality of the SNES. Many of these devices were modeled after earlier add-ons for the NES. The Super Scope is a light gun functionality similar to the NES Zapper, though the Super Scope features wireless capabilities, and the Super Advantage is an arcade-style joystick with adjustable turbo settings akin to the NES Advantage. Nintendo also released the SNES mouse in conjunction with Mario Paint. Hudson Soft, under license from Nintendo, released the Super Multi-Tap, a multiplayer adapter for use with its popular series of Bomberman games. Some of the more unusual controllers include the Batter Up baseball bat, the Life Fitness Entertainment System, an exercise bike controller with built-in monitoring software, and the TV Golf Club. Though Nintendo never released an adapter for playing NES games on the SNES, the Super Game Boy Adapter cartridge allows games designed for Nintendo's portable Game Boy system to be played on the SNES. The Super Game Boy touts several feature enhancements over the Game Boy, including palette substitution, custom screen borders, and access to the SNES console's features by specially enhanced Game Boy games. Japan also saw the release of the Super Game Boy 2, which adds a communication port to enable a second Game Boy to connect for multiplayer games. Like the NES before it, the SNES has unlicensed third-party peripherals, including a new version of the Game GD cheat cartridge designed for use with SNES games. Soon after the release of the SNES, companies began marketing backup drives such as the Super Wildcard, Super Pro Fighter Q, and Game Doctor. These devices create a backup of a cartridge. They can also be used to play illicit ROM images or to create copies of rented video games, violating copyright laws in many jurisdictions. Japan saw the release of the Satellaview, a modem which attaches to the Super Famicom's expansion port and connected to the St. Giga satellite radio station from April 23, 1995 to June 30th, 2000. Satellaview users could download gaming news and specially designed games, which were frequently either remakes or of sequels to older Famicom games and released in installments. In the United States, the relatively short-lived X-band allowed users to connect to a network via a dial-up modem to compete against other players around the country. During the SNES's life, Nintendo contracted with two different companies to develop a CD-ROM based peripheral for the console to compete with Sega's CD-ROM based add-on, Sega CD. Although a SNES CD prototype console was produced by Sony, Nintendo's deals with both Sony and Philips were cancelled, with Philips gaining the right to release a series of games based on Nintendo's franchises for its CDI multimedia console, and Sony going on to develop its own PlayStation console based on its initial dealings with Nintendo. On enhancement chips, I'm sure this will be exhilarating. As part of the overall plan for the SNES, rather than include an expensive CPU that would still become obsolete in a few years, the hardware designers made it easy to interface special coprocessor chips to the console, just like the MMC chips used for most NES games. This is most often characterized by 16 additional pins on the cartridge card edge. The Super FX is a RISC CPU designed to perform functions that the main CPU cannot feasibly do. The chip is primarily used to create 3D game worlds made with polygons, texture mapping, and light source shading. The chip can also be used to enhance 2D games. The Nintendo Fixed Point Digital Signal Processor, DSP, chip allowed for fast vector-based calculations, bitmap conversions, both 2D and 3D coordinate transformations, and other functions. 4 revisions of the chip exist, each physically identical, but with different microcode. The DSP-1 version, including the later 1A and 1B bug fix revisions, is used most often. The DSP-2, DSP-3, and DSP-4 are used in only one game each. Similar to the 5A22 CPU in the console, the SA1 chip contained a 65C816 processor core clocked at 10 MHz, a memory mapper, DMA, decompression and bitplane conversion circuitry, several programmable timers, and CIC region lockout functionality. In Japan, games could be downloaded cheaper than standard cartridges from Nintendo Power kiosks onto special cartridges containing flash memory and a Mega Chips MX1501 TFC chip. The chip manages communication with the kiosks to download ROM images and has an initial menu to select a game. Some were published both in cartridge and download form, and others were download only. The service closed on February 8th, 2007. Many cartridges contain other enhancement chips, most of which were created for use by a single company in a few games. The only limitations are the speed of the SNES itself to transfer data from the chip and the current limit of the console. On its reception and legacy, approximately 49.1 million SNES consoles were sold worldwide, with 23.35 million of those units sold in the Americas and 17.17 million in Japan. Although it could not quite repeat the success of the NES, which sold 61.91 million units worldwide, the SNES was the best-selling console of its era. In a 1997 year-end review, a team of 5 Electronic Gaming Monthly editors gave the Super Nintendo Entertainment System scores of 5.5, 8.0, 7.0, 7.0, and 8.0. Though they criticized how few new games were coming out for the system and how dated its graphics were compared to current generation consoles, they regarded its selection of must-have games to be still unsurpassed. Additionally, noting that used SNES games were readily available in bargain bins, most of them still recommended buying an SNES. In 2007, Game Trailers named the SNES as the second best console of all time in their list of top 10 consoles that left their mark on the history of gaming, citing its graphics, sound, and library of top quality games. In 2015, they also named it the best Nintendo console of all time, saying, "The list of games we love from this console completely annihilates any other roster from the Big N." Technology columnist Don Reisinger proclaimed the SNES is the greatest console of all time in January 2008, citing the quality of the games and the console's dramatic improvement over its predecessor. Fellow technology columnist Will Greenwald replied with a more nuanced view, giving giving the SNES top marks with his heart, the SNES with his head, and the PlayStation for its controller with his hands. Gaming Excellence also gave the SNES first place in 2008, declaring it simply the most timeless system ever created, with many games that stand the test of time and citing its innovation in controller design, graphics capabilities, and game storytelling. At the same time, Game Daily rated it 5th of the 10 greatest consoles for its graphics, audio, controllers, and games. In 2009, IGN named the Super Nintendo Entertainment System as the 4th best video game console, complementing its audio and number of AAA games. Talk about its emulation. Like the NES before it, the SNES has retained a long-lived fan base. It has continued to thrive on the second-hand market, emulators, and remakes. The SNES has taken the same revival path as the NES. Emulation projects began with the initial release of VSMC in '94, and Super Pasofami became the first working SNES emulator in 1996. During that time, two competing emulation projects, SNES 96 and SNES 97, merged to form SNES 9X. In 1997, SNES enthusiasts began programming an emulator named ZSNES. In 2004, Huygen began a development as BSNES in an effort to emulate the system as closely as possible. Nintendo of America took the same stance against the distribution of SNES ROM image files and the use of emulators as it did with the NES, insisting that they represented flagrant software piracy. Proponents of SNES emulation cite discontinued production of the SNES constituting abandonware status, the right of the owner of the respective game to make a personal backup via devices such as the Retroed Space Shifting for private use, the desire to develop homebrew games for the system, the frailty of SNES ROM cartridges and consoles, and the lack of certain foreign imports. Nintendo designed a hobbyist development system for the SNES but never released it. Emulation of the SNES is also available on platforms such as Android and iOS. The Nintendo DS line, the Gizmondo, the Dingu, and the GP2X by Game Park Holdings, as well as PDAs. Individual games have been included with emulators on some GameCube discs, and Nintendo's Virtual Console service for the Wii marks the introduction of officially sanctioned general SNES emulation. A dedicated mini-console, the Super NES Classic Edition, was released in September 2017 after the NES Classic Edition. The emulation-based system, which is physically modeled after the North American and European versions of the SNES in their respective regions, is bundled with two SNES-style controllers and comes preloaded with 21 games, including the previously unreleased Star Fox 2. And really, a lot of this article bored me to tears. This was partially lame. Okay, I'm being honest. Mostly good, though. So, hey, that's the good thing. It was mostly good. Partly lame, mostly good. What was the mostly good? Because that's what I want to focus on. Well, the last word they ended this on, or the last game, I should say, Star Fox 2. It's right there. Oh, I'm covering it. I don't know if you can see it. Anyway, Star Fox 2, those are my best memories of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. They talked about it before. Star Fox and Pilot Wings, you guys remember those? Those good times. Star Fox, Pilot Wings, obviously Super Mario World. Oh my god, Link to the Past. What am I talking about? The GOAT, right? Hey, if you guys write comments, please, if you are versed in the SNES, I want to know what is GOAT, and we're just gonna say A Link to the Past versus Mario World. It's gonna be one of those, right? So I want to hear from you. Oh no. I'll make it a poll. I'll make that a poll, okay? And then people can see once this video is already out. If you're listening to this, you can go reference what the majority said. Hopefully people will answer. Dude, you guys crush the polls that I put out. Holy crap. Like 300 people responding to questions. That blows me away. I love it so much. So yeah, I'm gonna go and do that right now. Link to the Past versus Super Mario World. That's what I'm gonna do. Yeah. Oh my god, Super Metroid, look at that. It's naming so many cool games. Did I just name these? Was I on autopilot and I named all of these and I completely spaced out? I think I was, because I don't really care about emulators. Super Mario World, Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past, Donkey Kong Country was so sick, Earthbound, great, Super Metroid, amazing. Obviously, Yoshi's Island, I don't remember too much, but I heard really good things about it. But yeah, go look for that poll, and I will talk to you guys soon. Where's my remote? It's right here. Talk to you in the comments. Bye.